Good afternoon, folks. Chief Meteorologist Nick Lilia here, taking a look at your tropical update, brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters. Got a lot going on for today. We got potential tropical cyclone numero dos out there. Number 2, potential Barry is kind of how we're talking about it down here, floating around in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as some other stuff to talk about as well. First things first, I just want to get the bottom line. If all you're here for is what's going to happen, NHC is forecasting a Category 1 hurricane at landfall somewhere along the Louisiana coast on Saturday. Now, originally they were thinking Saturday morning. It's not moving too terribly quick. They're now thinking maybe midday at some point. You'll see here in a second what I mean by that. 4 to 10 inches of rain possible for us. 4 on the low end, 10, I know that sounds really high. On the higher end, it could be even more than that, and unfortunately, it could be even less than 4. The forecast for rain is going to be highly dependent on the forecast track, and we are still about 12 hours away from being able to really have a decent grasp on what's going to happen with this thing. The tornado threat is also a part of the where it goes dictates exactly how high our threat is also. And again, we're talking about Saturday and Sunday on here. To break it down even further, wind 15 to 25 mile an hour sustained wind I don't think can be ruled out with this, with gusts to 45 miles an hour possible. Depending on the track, again, I'm going to say this over and over and over again, depending on the track, we could see a little bit more. I don't think we get any less than 15 to 25 mile an hour wind out of this, even if it scoots off to the east. I think we'll still have some decent sustained winds. I mean, the wind outside today in some places is sustained at 10 to 15, so I don't think this is out of the question. Again, tornadoes possible on here, 4 to 10 inches of rain, some localized flooding. And these all line up with the same scale that we tend to use for severe weather. We're trying to use here to keep it easy. The straight line wind risk is pretty low. I think we'll get some trees down across the area, but it won't be crazy. The tornado risk is kind of a slight risk in there. I'm more concerned about the rain and the possible flooding, particularly with some of the low-lying areas. And I think we'll end up with some power outages from those trees falling over. No word yet from the local power companies if they're starting to kind of, what are they, stage assets is the fancy word they use for that. Put people in the places or set up people in places so that they can take care of those power outages pretty quickly. Okay, so what does it look like out here? Well, here's PTC number 2. I don't know about you, but I kind of like Invest 92L better than PTC, Potential Tropical Cyclone 2, but the National Hurricane Center has to do that in order for their computers that they use to actually have something to, nail down for issuing watches and warnings. Outside of that, the Caribbean is quiet. Out into the Atlantic is quiet. We had a little wave come off the coast of Africa the other day. That's already starting to fall apart. We've got another one back in behind it. I will say this about this wave out here. It's got a lot of low-level vorticity associated with it. I mean, look at the low-level spin that we have in there. Maybe worth watching as we head through the next couple of days. But in the meantime, here's the real game in town. A wind at 30 miles an hour, gusting to 40, 125 miles off to the east-southeast of the mouth of the Mississippi River. So we're about right there, back over here. It's moving to the southwest at about 8 miles an hour, so it's not moving too terribly quickly. It is forecast to be a depression, a tropical storm, and eventually a Category 1 hurricane at landfall. Landfall, again, like I said, sometime midday Saturday. The further east it goes, notice here's Friday in the afternoon, the further east it goes, if it goes, it would make landfall a little earlier. The further west it goes, the later landfall is going to be. And again, that's just because the function of it just going slow. So the further it has to travel, of course, the later it's going to make landfall. And so the idea is that it's going to be sometime during kind of midday Saturday if you play the game of averages here between the two. But unfortunately, until we get the Hurricane Hunter data in there, which they're flying through the storm right now, once we get that in there, this afternoon I should say, just in case you're watching this later in the evening, once they get the data into the models, we'll have I think, a better idea about what to expect in terms of where this is going. They've issued tropical storm watches. Now, our computer still has it from Morgan City all the way around to the mouth of the Pearl River. I had a chance to read the actual discussion from the National Hurricane Center, and they only have it from the mouth of the Mississippi to the mouth of the Pearl River for the tropical storm watch. And then they have the hurricane watch that goes from the mouth of the Mississippi River all the way back to just off to the south of Lake Charles. Notice this doesn't include the coast of Mississippi at all. They don't even have storm surge products out yet for the Mississippi coastline, though they do have it out all the way to the mouth of the Pearl River. Okay. Water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico are very warm, and with the algal bloom along the coast, along the shelf, as well as the dead zone just off the coast of Louisiana, that tends to stratify the water, which means you've got a lot of fresh water on top of all the salt water. When you stratify out the water, what you do is you're able to warm up that surface layer because you're not getting a lot of mixing. And that mixing is what keeps the water at a reasonable temperature. And when you get out into the open Gulf of Mexico, you have a lot of turning over of the water. You get showers and thunderstorms. The cold water sinks. More warmer water replaces it. You got a lot of mixing. Closer to the shore, when the water is stratified the way it is easier to keep very warm water closer to the surface. So, generally speaking, what we have is when systems move a little bit closer to shore, they get over the shelf, the water is a little bit cooler because it is well mixed, and they tend to kind of die as they move ashore. That may, I'm not saying it will be, that may not be the case this year. It's not a guarantee that this thing gains strength as it moves ashore, but this year just may be a little bit different than previous years. That's all I'm saying. But water temperature, at 90-degree water temperature out here, 87 degrees, 86, 85. Very warm water into the Gulf of Mexico. If we're taking that track, which takes it kind of in this area here, we're talking about water temperatures in the mid-80s, which is plenty good for cooking yourself up, unfortunately, a hurricane. So here's your storm surge advisories. They're just in effect for parts of Louisiana so far, not in effect for any of the coastal counties of Mississippi. Here's your probability of tropical storm force wind, just a 20% chance, give or take, for our area, 17% down across parts of southern Alabama, and a 34% chance in New Orleans. Most of the best chance for tropical storm force wind across parts of Louisiana and parts of East Texas. The probability of hurricane force wind, mainly right along the coast of Louisiana. Generally, with weaker hurricanes like this, a Category 1, even a Category 2, the hurricane force wind tends to be right around that center of the storm. So people say, oh, this is going to be my first hurricane here in South Mississippi. Probably not. If the hurricane makes landfall as far east as, say, the middle of the cone or the east side of the cone, you're not going to deal with a real hurricane around here. There will be wind, 15 to 25 miles an hour. There will be rain, 4 to 10 inches maybe. But that's not what it means to go through a hurricane. The folks in Lake Charles and maybe even back toward Baton Rouge will be going through a hurricane. The rest of us will just be getting pieces of it. Most likely arrival time of tropical storm force winds, if you do get it, for the Pine Belt, Saturday morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning was the onset, the most likely onset of tropical storm force wind. We'll have to see. I think we're going to be pretty far off to the east, depending on where the main track of this goes. It's still something that we're kind of keeping tabs on. This intensity tracker was supposed to work, and it just didn't, but that's okay. The idea is you watch the spaghettis go on shore, and we can kind of pause things and take a look at what the same models are saying about the intensity. Suffice to say that most of the models are keeping it as a tropical storm to maybe a Category 1. Again, that's this area tropical storm, this area Category 1 hurricane. Most of the lines kind of right in there, as you can see, right before it makes landfall, which lines up with what the National Hurricane Center is saying. So neither one are out in left field versus the other. Here's the latest from, I believe this is the European model, which has done a pretty decent job with this so far. It's got it basically due south of us Thursday afternoon at 1:30. It continues to travel off to kind of the west-northwest, gaining strength. But notice how this thing is pretty lopsided. We're going to have a little bit of shear going across this thing as it kind of tries to move ashore. There's a trough well off to the north. You've got high pressure back off to the northwest. It's going to be doing just enough to kind of peel part of this thing off. That's why it's not going to wrap itself completely up. That's also why, for the most part, we don't anticipate this to become any kind of Category 2, 3, 4, or 5 storm. Could it happen? Sure, there's a non-zero chance that it happens. However, most of the stuff that we're looking at and the data that we have available to us doesn't suggest that that is really a possibility. Okay, so we set this thing into further motion, and notice how we have it coming ashore kind of just off to the south, kind of just near Morgan City, and then it lifts off to the north through central Louisiana. Here we are Sunday morning, about 9:30 in the morning. This is where all the heavy rain is across some of our western counties, according to this one model. The National Hurricane Center forecast is roughly about the same. So when the WPC gives out, somewhere between 2 to 6 to up to 10 inches of rain across our area, can't really argue with it, because you look at future counties and say, well, yeah, that's where all the heavy rain is. So that's going to be where the highest rain totals are going to be as this passes through. We can look at wind speeds as this thing passes by as well. We stopped this thing Saturday morning at about 8:30, about 10 to 15 miles an hour. You can see a couple of gusts in there to 20 or 25. As this moves a little bit closer, Saturday evening, 15 to 20 mile an hour wind across the area with some gusts of 30 and 40. That may be a little high, but 15 to 25 mile an hour wind I don't think is too out of the question. Here we go through Sunday morning. Again, 15 to 20, we've got gusts 40 to 45, 30 to 40, kind of somewhere in there. I think that's kind of a safe bet. 15 to 25 is what we're forecasting right now, with gusts to 45 miles an hour. Again, it's just one model. You look at some of the other ones and the winds are maybe a little bit lower, others a little bit higher. But I think that's a good kind of in between. I will say this, through Sunday night, we're still going to be dealing with some gusty wind. Again, this isn't hurricane force wind. This is just gusty wind. And the goal is here to get you prepared for what's actually going to happen. Anybody can tell you, oh, we're going to get a hurricane. Ah! That's not what we're trying to do. I want to get you guys prepared for what's actually going to happen around here. What's actually going to happen is some pretty gusty wind. It could knock over a couple of trees, given the amount of rain that we're looking at. But it may not feel very bad outside because, again, 15 to 25 mile an hour winds, not too terrible. That lingers around through Monday morning. How much rain are we talking about? Well, kind of depends on what model you look at. The forecast right now, again, 4 to 10 inches of rain. But if this track pivots at all in any one direction, that could mean a big difference in our rainfall totals, which is why at the onset of this I said 4 to 10 inches, but it kind of depends on the track, unfortunately, and we're still about 12 hours away from having a decent feel for where this thing is going to go as we wait for the Hurricane Hunter data to come in. That does a really good job at helping us figure out what exactly is going to happen. So right now, most of the models are pegging the heaviest rain between about New Orleans and Baton Rouge. The poor folks in Baton Rouge, according to the GFS model, going to get pegged with a whole mess of rain around here. Again, the GFS last night was showing somewhere, excuse me, this is the European model. The European last night was showing this actually pulled off to the west by about 50 miles. The GFS model is showing the same stretch, except it kind of pivots it and leans it a little more northeasterly and actually slides 8 inches of rain through Hattiesburg. Again, it just kind of depends on the model. Here it is. Here's the GFS. I flip-flopped. I apologize about that. So it's got us with 6, 7 inches of rain, but you see this little white streak in here. You go up to the legend, that's 15 inches of rain. So the track is going to really dictate who gets the most rain. In this, it only has Baton Rouge with 5 inches of rain, or 12 inches of rain for New Orleans. And I know you're probably watching, oh, well, which one's going to happen? Neither, and that's why we have a forecast of 4 to 10 inches. We put a range. I don't stick a flag in the ground and say this is exactly how much you're going to get at your house, because it's impossible to do, unfortunately. Okay. Is there anything else out here worth talking about? So there's everything with PTC2, a chance for Barry. Is there anything else out here? Well, here's your little wave we were watching just a couple of seconds ago that I was talking about. Notice the GFS actually picks up on this and says, well, we may actually have something out here for a while, but eventually I think it gets overtaken by a lot of the dry air that's out here and a little bit of the shear. There's Barry moving ashore and doing whatever it's going to do. And then the dry air kind of fills back in behind that as we head through the middle of July. So that's a look at your tropical update. Hopefully I got through everything that you're looking for in terms of what's going to happen around here with Barry. Big thanks to the folks at Pine Belt Gutters for helping out with this. And again, tropical update for July 10th of 2019.